I then move to the matter of Thanet. No other authority has sought to emulate Thanet, and I am of the view that to do so would certainly produce more problems than it could ever solve. The idea that Thanet has a 5% limit, which is equivalent in its status and its utility to our 10% limit, is unfortunately not true. Thanet introduced a 5% limit, and in their new 2020 local plan, they sought to retain that 5% threshold as being prescriptive across the whole borough. That was the policy they took forward to Regulation 19. 5% across the whole borough. This resulted in the inspector, during the examination, modifying the policy to remove the threshold as a prescriptive figure and instead applied only a supporting text. So it's still there in their plan, but only as supporting text. Thanet has therefore maintained a borough-wide guidance for a 5% standard, but the inspector has reduced its effectiveness by relegating it to supporting text, in that it is now subordinate to site-specific subjective assessments of the, quote, impact of the living conditions of neighbouring residents through noise or general disturbance within the policy. He's effectively negated the policy. The need for community-specific restrictions on HMO can therefore be seen to require truly exceptional evidence. And if one is to use Thanet as a precedent, relevant only to areas of highest concentration, Thanet may be able to use this in two specific, very, very deprived areas, Cliftonville and Margate Central. Any of you who know Thanet will know just how deprived Cliftonville is. So I would suggest that were council to be minded to seek a 5% threshold, this should only be done, it should only be pursued if the Assistant Director of Economy, Planning and Transport can advise of a way in which we could have a prescriptive 5% threshold, and also that in pursuing this application, we could do so without jeopardizing the current threshold of the 10% HMOs which we have within a 50-metre radius. What we have in this city is rock solid, 10%. You can't go beyond 10%. If, however, you have a nice house somewhere in Thanet, which is suitable to become an HMO, you will take it forward, even though it may be 15, 20% in that area. And if the council turns it down, saying we want 5%, what would happen then? The applicant would immediately go to the planning inspectorate, and the planning inspectorate would say, but it is supporting text. We have to look at the specific subjective things. The subjective things, the size of the house, the location of the house. The 5% is not particularly important. I can see this being overthrown. We have got to be very careful in this city. We don't go for the bird in the bush and completely lose the bird we have in the hand. That is my response to that question, and I trust that members will take that on board.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Simpson, do you have a supplementary?
I do. And thank you for the answer. As a city, we have to justify our position HMO policy to the government inspector, regulator, as stated. Portsmouth being the most densely populated... Thank you. Portsmouth being the most densely populated city in the UK with 208,000 people, with nowhere to park, stress on the Victoria sewers, lack of amenities, loss of family homes, is this reason not enough to qualify for a 5%?
Councillor Mason.
Oh, I'm afraid it's not. And I would think that you should also, since we're talking about the density of population and the problems of parking, note that the area which has got the least density of areas with lower density of population, where there is more parking space, where you can park on both sides of the road because the roads are wider, and incidentally where the houses have got bigger rooms and so would need less work to convert them to HMOs, are the areas in the north of the city. If we went for 5%, if we got it, the likely outcome would be that there would be very little difference in the south of the city, where most areas are over 5%, most roads are over 5% anyway. You would move to the north of the city and into the areas of the big Victorian and Edwardian houses, or big family houses in the north of the city on the slightly wider roads. Be careful what you wish for.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Simpson, do you have a second supplementary?
It's not a question, and unfortunately I can't give a statement, which is that they're already doing that in the North Portsmouth anyway, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Hunt?
Would Councillor Mason agree with me that those who keep on about these 5% are going to end up with much more than they bargained for? Because, as he has described just now, Lord Mayor, if I may, in Copner and Hilsea and Drayton Farlington and that way, they'll end up with even more than the 10%. This 10% is a hard and rigid hard-fought policy that we need to stick by. Would you agree with that, Councillor Mason?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Mason.
Having been a member here when I think you and I had to push through the 10%, the chances of getting 10% at that time and getting it to stick and making it prescriptive were very few. We had to fight hard for that. And yes, I would agree with you that the outfall of changing to a 5%, even if we got 5% prescriptive, which is very, very, very unlikely, in my opinion, having read what the planning inspector said to Havant, wrote, Sir, Thanet, a Joe Biden moment, sorry, to Thanet. Even if we got that, I think that the problems would be felt very much more in the north of the city, in the areas which you mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Swan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Southern Water have announced publicly that the cost of maintaining the city utility massively impacted by HMOs is directly responsible for ever-increasing bills. Does the Cabinet member acknowledge that this is the fact?
Thank you, Councillor Swan. Councillor Mason.
This is a question on the costs which flow from HMOs. I think, first of all, we must look at the situation which we have anyway. There is a housing demand in this city which is not met. Prices are high. Many people cannot afford anything other than living in an HMO, or are living in an HMO in order to save money to move to a flat and actually move up the housing ladder. So if we didn't have any HMOs, we would have a major, major housing problem in this city.
Councillor Mason.
So far as
Councillor
utilities...
Mason, just give me 1 second. Councillor Saunders has a declaration of interest.
Thank you. As this has got into more of a discussion than I'd hoped, I have a personal but not prejudicial interest to declare, which is that I live in a HMO. I reserve my right to ask any questions in a bit.
It's all right, I'm just thinking where I've got to. Everybody who is housed in this city, and we need to house people, uses water. Everybody uses electricity. Everybody flushes the toilet. The amount of demand for our infrastructure is dependent upon the number of people, not whether they're living in HMOs or in little flats or crammed together beds in bedsits or sofa surfing. They all need to drink. They all need to excrete. They all need to have light. They all need to have heat. So I don't accept the premise which Councillor Swan brings forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Can I ask Councillor Mason, did I get this right, that the suggestion is that we replace our blanket 10% limit on HMOs with Thanet's 5% threshold, which is not enforceable, because that would seem to me to be a recipe for allowing property developers across the city to ignore any limits on HMOs and build HMOs absolutely everywhere, which I'm sure everybody would want to avoid.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon Jackson. Councillor Mason.
It's a matter of what we would apply for. If we are going to try and change our policy, if there was a mind to do that, we would certainly go for 5% prescriptive throughout the city. Only one borough, only one local authority out of 332 which we have surveyed uses 5%, and that was downgraded from prescriptive to advisory. Of the 52 councils, local plans in England, which limit HMOs, 35 of them, 67%, like us, use 10% as a threshold. 11, which is 21%, use 20% as the threshold, and 4% between 4, haven't got the percentage here, use a percentage between 25 and 50% of the area being in HMOs. One has a variable percentage up to 15%. So that is the situation around the country. If we were, as you say, if we were to look to 5%, we would of course go to have a 5% prescriptive, but there isn't a single authority in the country which has 5% prescriptive, and the one that tried had it downgraded and is now in a worse position than we are.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Weems.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think a few of my questions have been asked. So, does the Cabinet member agree that it's only a positive that so many councillors are engaged on this subject? And do you not think it would be prudent to have a policy for Portsmouth, and indeed in conjunction with other suggestions such as radii changes and distance to change the 50-metre radius?
Thank you, Councillor Weems. Councillor Mason.
The 50-metre radius is normal. We did try to get it by streets, and indeed also West Lancashire tried to get it by streets. They managed in 1 or 2 cases to get specific streets, but generally throughout the country it's the 50-metre radius which the Planning Inspectorate is happy with. Do I think there should be more involvement? Well, there will certainly be a considerable discussion when, at the next council meeting, I hope and intend to bring forward the draft local plan for your consideration, and I trust approval before we put it forward to Regulation 19 consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Fielding.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Does the Cabinet member agree with me that sui generis applications often cause additional burden on local amenities, and we need proper reform of the planning system to address this loophole.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Councillor Mason.
Sui generis, which is, for those who are not aware, going up beyond the official statutory limit on the numbers of people living in an HMO. When they get up to a certain level, it becomes a sui generis planning. So it's increase of number of people in the house. It is a problem, yes, of course it is a problem. Could it be solved by a change in government policy? Yes, it most certainly could, if we were allowed to have tighter, not looser, but tighter controls on HMOs. But that is a matter for central government instructing the planning inspectorate. I wish we had the powers to do it ourselves, but we don't. That has to come from central government. I agree with you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Does the Cabinet member agree with me that the policy that he's outlined in West Lancashire is an Article 4 directive and is not necessarily part of the local plan, and is connected purely to the existence of student accommodation, which would not deal with the increasing numbers of HMOs we are seeing in the north of the city?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Councillor Mason.
Yes, yes, and yes. The Article 4 directive, incidentally, is what we are working on at the moment, but it would have, when you come to renew your local plan, you have to incorporate that within the local plan.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. No one else indicating. So we're going to question 3. Councillor Brian Madwick, to be answered by Councillor Gerald Vernon-Jackson. Councillor Madwick.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As I think you might have noticed, I've struggled to read all the papers today because I left my glasses at home. I think you noticed that, yeah. So could I just ask the question in my name, question 3? But I would like to ask the Lord Mayor for the right to a follow-up question if I need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madwick. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Madwick. The proposed transport strategy was adopted in November 2021 alongside a 3-year implementation plan at full council. This strategy sets out the long-term vision for transport across the city, along with an implementation plan for capital and revenue delivery. At the end of each financial year, the LTP implementation plan is brought to the Cabinet Member of Transport's decision meeting for approval of the capital programme following full council. Last year's document can be found on the council's website. The last LTP4 implementation plan, the next LTP4 implementation plan will be brought to the next Cabinet meeting for Transport's decision meeting in March of this year following full council. An annual monitoring report is also presented to Cabinet Member for Transport at Q1, which outlines the deliverables towards the LTP. The report for 2023 can also be found on the Council website. I am conscious that these reports go to the Cabinet Member for Transport and spokespeople, but it doesn't get a wider circulation. So I've written to the Transport Department to ask them in this year and future years to make sure they're circulated to all members prior to the decision meeting, to make sure that all members have the ability to comment and look at what those plans say. So I've got a whole lot of other stuff, but I think that's it for the minute. I think the other issue is that there's funding that comes in different ways. Lord Mayor, sorry. There's funding that comes in different ways. There's the stuff that we've just voted for in the capital budget, but most of the money is tied up within the COLAS contract, which is part of the revenue budget, which keeps on going. And that's a contract that was written 20-odd years ago, and it sets various criteria of how the money is spent. That gives us much less ability to be flexible in terms of how decisions are made about where work will be done on the highway. It's an area where I think we can have useful discussions amongst the transport portfolio, because when the COLAS contract finishes, we'll need a different way of working, and that may mean that there's more flexibility.
There we go. Thank you, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Madrick?
Not really, but I just want to make everybody aware that when I asked this question, I did ask it for the whole of the north of the city, not just Paulsgrove, but Paulsgrove I think is very badly neglected, and I'd like to see some movement on it shortly. Thank you.
Councillor Vernon-Jackson?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do have a list of 106 projects in the north of the city which I could read, but I know other people want to go to the football, and I think you're off to fun and games somewhere else. So interesting, looking at where or it may be at the community centre. Is it fun and games, or what are you up to?
I've got a Lord Mayor's Charity Bill quiz.
Excellent. Fun and games. So, looking at where this discretionary funding has been spent this year, and looking at the division between the south of the city and the north of the city, it's almost exactly half and half. The bits that I think that cause comment is the stuff that's in the COLAS contract, where we don't have the discretion and where decisions are made according to the sorts of road. The areas I think we need to work hardest on is thinking about the tertiary road network. So the estate roads, etc. COLAS, because the contract, have been putting money into having those roads done, but only a certain amount of money. And from this year onwards, they're not putting any money in, because that's what the contract says. And I think that means that we as a council will need to look closely at what works we can do to try to address those roads. And I think road uses and users are very different now than 20 years ago. I think we're now much more conscious of people who don't drive cars, but who ride bikes, who walk, who ride scooters, etc., for whom road surfaces need to be different and maybe better, and we might need to be able to reflect that in future budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Do you have a second supplementary?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Madrick. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In March 2023, it was announced that the government was giving over £300,000 to Portsmouth City Council to repair potholes. Can I ask, where did you repair potholes outside of the COLAS budget with that £300,000, and how much of it is still to spend?
Thank you, Councillor Atkins. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
So that money, as I understand it, went towards the £60 million that the government haven't given us for the COLAS contract. So we now only have a deficit of 59,700,000 because of the government's meanness. Did the government sign the COLAS contract? No, but they did. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Councillor Heaney.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think I recall that meeting when Councillor Stagg, your predecessor, was actually at the Cabinet meeting, and she did say that she would furnish a list from COLAS that would be shared with ward members so that they knew the prioritisation of particular roads within particular wards, to get an idea of how it's done. Can you explain why, despite her assurance at Council, that hasn't been actioned?
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Terribly sorry, I don't know, but it seems a very sensible idea. And Brian, Graham, if you, I get you mixed up. So if you could drop me an email, I'll pass it on, and I think it's a very sensible idea for that to be circulated to everybody. But just drop me an email.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Vernon-Jackson, could you please confirm that the requirements of the COLAS contract stipulate that anything, generally, before it even becomes a pothole, has to be 20 millimetres or more in order to be repaired? 20 millimetres or more to be repaired, which is pretty tiny and was generally set because potholes are deemed to be more serious faults in the road than 20 millimetres, and that if anybody spots one that is, COLAS will be required by the contract to immediately repair it. So the very idea that we put more money into something that's already completely funded compulsorily in a budget seems slightly strange, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Would you not agree?
Thank you, Councillor Pitt. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
My Lord Mayor, I would never have the temerity to disagree with my leader. At least public. Yes, so Councillor Pitt is absolutely right, and I think one of the great benefits of the COLAS contract is that our roads are so much better than most other places. I know Hampshire County Council are deeply ashamed of the appalling quality of the roads they have in Hampshire, and they look with envy at what's happened here in Portsmouth. Now, I think the person who wrote the contract, PFI contract for COLAS, the city engineer Peter King, did a brilliant job about protecting his area of the city council from any cuts. Because everywhere else, particularly Hampshire, is well known as the capital of the measly and councils of the country, according to the Daily Mail. They have cut the funding for looking after potholes and continue to do so. I think it's another £7 million cut to repairing potholes in Hampshire this year by the Conservatives. So here, I think the interesting thing we're doing is we're experimenting with a machine that will actually mend potholes that are smaller than 20 mil so that they don't become even bigger. So following on from the excellent work the housing do, trying to get in and sort things out before they become a big problem, so you do less money on reactive work, more money on planned work.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. Do come and have a look at my stretch of Samuel Road. I don't have anyone else indicating, so we'll go to question 4. So we'll go to Councillor George Madrick to be answered by Councillor Fazakerley. George.
Perfect. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Question in my name.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Councillor Madrick, I'm sorry I've got my back to you. I would wobble round to try and face you, but I fear I'd roll over. It's a terrible thing, you know, when you can go outwards and not upwards, but I blame my parents. Anyway, in answer to your question, yes.
Thank you for that comprehensive and thorough answer, Councillor Fazakerley. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Madrick?
No, I guess. I mean, do you know what? This is the second time I've asked the question in 3 years, and the second time the response of no has come up. No, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor Madrick. Does anyone else wish to? Well then, Councillor Atkins.
Important grammatical difference. Will you bring a report to full council on the difference between Wolverhampton private hire vehicles and Portsmouth private hire vehicles?
Yeah, yes, Councillor.
I think, my Lord Mayor, the standing orders do say that out of courtesy when people are speaking, they should stand. And I think the discourtesy from Councillor Atkins is depressing.
Thank you for that, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. I appreciate the support. Thank you. I was trying to indicate for you to stand up. Thank you. Councillor Fazakerley.
Has anyone got a crane? Yes, of course I will. I've spoken, obviously, to licensing manager before this. I'm conscious of the fact, obviously, that we're now in February. PERDA kicks in soon. But as I answered, yes, I'll do my best to deliver that. So, well, I've said yes, I better do, haven't I? So, yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Weems.
When can we expect this report to come to full council?
Thank you, Councillor Weems. Councillor Fazakerley.
When I've lost about 3 stone. Well, I can't give you a date. I'll just give you my assurance that I'll bring it as quickly as I can do. I'm conscious of the time span, so I'll write to you or something. But yes, I'll bring a report back, okay? Cross my heart, okay? A rather large heart. Okay?
Thank you, Councillor Fazakerley. Thank you, members. That brings us to the end of today's meeting. So I will close the meeting at 17:02.